Yes, the storm that won't move. Hurricane Dorian is refusing to budge this evening, just off the northern coast of Grand Bahama. This is a 6-hour loop, and all it has done is a loop around itself, and now might be doing another one there on the latest imagery. It is mind-blowing how slowly this storm has moved over the course of well over 24 hours now, getting towards 2 days. I think it's mentally draining for a lot of us who are just monitoring the storm, never mind the people who are within the storm at this point. And hurricane force winds will still be occurring on that island, possibly major hurricane force winds, probably actually, as the eye lingers extremely closely from the coast. Storm surges as well, exceeding 12 feet in some areas too, and rainfall amounts which could be absolutely astronomical. We've got an hour of discussion here to tell you the latest about Hurricane Dorian. There's not too much to tell. It still has the same wind speed, it still has the same pressure as when we left you earlier on, 140 mile an hour winds, a pressure of 942 millibars. No changes in the warnings. The National Hurricane Center will issue a full advisory in an hour at 11 p.m. Eastern. My name is Nathan Foy, joined by a large team tonight consisting of David, Orlando, Devon, Thomas, and Ram. Good evening to you all.
Good evening.
Hi, Nathan.
Good evening.
And I'm looking at the satellite imagery, and what does one say? It looks like it's taken a dip to the south, because when we were last live, the coast wasn't really inside the eye, but looking at the latest imagery, you can clearly see the coastal region, and it's sobering. It really is. Just see what it's doing to the Bahamas and those people, including that, I think, on the Disney staff. And we know that it just hasn't moved.
That seems to be the big thing with it. The storm right now is really refusing to move. It's virtually stationary, and it's really undergoing an eye wall replacement cycle as we speak.
To read out the latest from the National Hurricane Center's 10 p.m. update, extremely dangerous Dorian remains stationary and continues to thrash Grand Bahama Island. Residents should remain in shelter on that island as they are currently experiencing the eye wall of Dorian. Still, residents in the Abacos should also continue to stay in their shelter until conditions subside later tonight. If you do heed that, which, well, it's advice from the National Hurricane Center, that would be about 36 hours almost in shelter for those areas, because the storm initially made landfall at 12:45 p.m. Eastern Time yesterday on the first of the Bahamas. This storm has moved very little in that time. As a matter of fact, it has moved, I can tell you, 88 miles in 34 hours.
Oh, I guess we can start by saying that the storm is starting to move with a little bit of a jog to the north and west now.
Those latest frames from Devon's screen there. What are we looking at in terms of structure and intensity now?
Oh, what we're looking at is the storm that currently has concentric eye walls. So this storm is currently undergoing an eye wall replacement cycle. the inner eye wall is deteriorating at a rapid rate, which you can see by a shrinking of the eye, as well as these wobbles that we continue to see in its track. We should see the eye wall replacement cycle continue here as the storm continues to stall right here just to the north of Grand Bahama Island, where you can pretty much just sit and wait here. Conditions in Florida have pretty much not changed all day long. Tropical storm force winds are either ashore or just offshore right now. I'm sure tropical storm force gusts are happening on shore. But other than that, it's pretty much just a waiting game right now to figure out what this storm is doing. Recon can't really give us good data because the recon estimates are not exactly accurate in shallow waters, and it's not useful at all over land. So it's really difficult for recon to get a pinpoint strength on this, and satellite estimates have been pretty underestimating of this storm pretty much for its entire lifespan. So it's really, really difficult to tell just how strong this storm is. One thing that we can say for certain is that at least a dangerous Category 4 that is still producing winds in wind speeds sustained in excess of 130 miles an hour over Grand Bahama Island, and will likely continue to do so for an extended period of time.
Something that I've noticed with the 0Z models that came out a couple of hours ago, it looks as though the models have shifted a little east in the short term again. Very slow movement up to 24 hours, but not so far northwest than what they were previously saying, possibly to the extent where hurricane force winds could be avoided on Florida. Maybe, maybe not. Hurricane warnings are in effect along the coast. Everyone should still be preparing as if hurricane conditions will arrive tomorrow. I don't know if anyone has any thoughts on that.
Well, of course, with the system moving really slowly at the moment, it's going to be interesting to see how close the storm actually ends up getting to the southeast coast and Florida, especially since it's currently under some portions of the coastline is under a hurricane warning, and some portions also may experience tropical storm force winds as well. But yeah, it's a very delicate situation, but it's also a very dangerous situation nonetheless for those areas that remain under hurricane warnings, and where Dorian is over still after dozens of hours with barely any movement.
Model consensus for intensity is calling for the storm to lose Category 4 status within 24 hours. And you could ascertain from this graphic maybe about a 40% chance that it loses Category 4 status in 12 hours. And then it will remain a Category 3. National Hurricane Center picked up on that possibly for quite a while, up to the 48-hour mark at least, possibly up to the 72-hour mark. That's 3 days from now, before weakening further and taking another stair-step downwards. You can see that quite clearly there on the models. The National Hurricane Center themselves, with their last forecast, are calling for a major hurricane out to at least 2 days, and there it is weakening on Thursday. Could still be a strong Category 2 by that point, but we'll just have to wait and see. The National Hurricane Center will issue a new forecast cone at the end of this hour, so we will show you that when it comes in at 11 p.m. I really doubt very much will change at all on that cone, because the storm has barely moved. I don't know if anyone else wants to chip in at this point with any information or any observations that they've made.
Well, right now, news and reports are still coming in from areas that Dorian has already passed over. I've seen news. Of course, there's been stuff on social media showing and showcasing the absolute power and destruction that Dorian continues to bring to the Bahamas but also the number of fatalities are also beginning to rise, and there's even graphic pictures of such on full display as well. So this just proves to be showing off that the storm remains to be highly dangerous, and it still remains to be a major hurricane and a hurricane as well. So basically, uh, it is a very dangerous situation for any areas that are looking to be affected or already being affected by this storm.
Yep, and thanks for sticking with us here on our live coverage, which has now been running for just over 3 days straight, 24/7 coverage here, or at least 24/7 imagery, a live imagery of the storm. And these are the latest pictures, the last frames in this satellite sequence. It begins 6 hours ago. The latest image here, just going to catch it now, 6 minutes past, which is just 5 minutes ago. So we are pretty much up to date with the latest imagery of the storm, and you can see it did that loop earlier, and now it's just really stalling again, and it looks like it's taken another turn now towards the west-northwest. So
I would like to say that we do have aircraft reconnaissance within the storm. We have NOAA 2, which is pretty much finishing up its mission right now. Also showing still a distinct double eyewall feature, showing that the eyewall replacement cycle is not quite completed yet, but it is getting rushed to complete. And we also have AF 308 mission number 35 currently flying into Dorian now, should be making a full pass of the storm within this hour of coverage.
but you said earlier on in earlier hours of our stream that they may only be partially useful.
Yeah, these missions aren't necessarily going to be useful for detecting like how strong the storm is wind speed wise, but it will be very useful for detecting and will also still be useful for determining the minimum central pressure, which the latest drops on from NOAA 2 seems to have the storm at roughly 946 millibars.
So this upwelling, not really an issue. Not yet.
Oh, I'm starting to wonder how much of this is upwelling and how much of it is actually land interaction with Grand Bahama. It's probably a combination of both.
And noticeably now, as it has been before really, but the northern side of the storm appears to be considerably weaker than the southern side, and we speculated earlier that might be due to wind shear. Is that so?
I'm sorry, I missed that. What did you say?
The northern side of the storm appears markedly weaker than the southern side due to wind shear, is that?
That I do not know. I would imagine to the upper level anticyclone of the storm, I would imagine that wind shear is pretty much non-existent for the storm.
And the western side is looking very poor in most recent frames that we're looking at here, to be honest, Devon. It's the worst I think I might have seen it. Barely no reds at all in one of the gaps there. Yeah, massive gap in that last frame where there's only oranges wrapping around the western side. Whether that is a sustained development there, that could mean something big if it keeps up, I should imagine. That is, to me, it's a sign of upwelling, that.
Yeah, the western side has been expanding, contracting, and obviously it's the western eyewall that deteriorated first during the eyewall replacement cycle. So I don't think it's any wonder that the western side looks the worst right now.
The maximum cloud top on the western side in the gap. Sorry, I should say the worst part of the western eyewall, the weakest point of the storm, the cloud top's there right now, just getting a number. Just about to load. Minus 55. So there is a gap of minus 55 there, which is the most considerable gap that we've seen in the storm since it peaked. Meanwhile, in the eye,
-55.
the temperature in the eye right now is 8 degrees Celsius. Generally a indicator of strengthening or weakening, but maybe not so much in this instance. It has stayed fairly constant for the last few hours. At least we're not getting numbers like 15 like we were earlier today. So the eye might just be on the verge of fizzling a little more, but how many times have we said this? And this storm's slow movement, but every time we do say it, it is more, the longer this storm stays here, the more likely, sort of playing with fire by stalling, and it could eventually burn itself out.
That would really be the hope here. It would, just think about how different this scenario is. This storm was just only 20 miles to the north. Just think about how different this scenario would be. Like, the fact that this thing is just stalling over Grand Bahama is just awe-inspiring.
Terrifying.
Yeah, I haven't seen anything like it, and hopefully nothing like it happens again.
Well, I don't think there's a huge amount we can talk about, so let's go over to some questions. Do we think the hurricane can just go west? Well, it better not, because no one's forecasting that at the minute.
Yeah, it's not the steering pattern is quite frankly not that simple. It's very complicated. There seems to be the ridge is already decaying, and beyond that, there is a trough that is supposed to bring the storm to begin making trending a northwestern motion, which we've been waiting to see if that'll actually start up. Basically, the storm should eventually begin to turn towards the north. How far west it'll get, hopefully it won't get closer than it's already forecasted to, but all of that types of things are waiting to be seen. I believe you mentioned earlier that models have trended slightly east, but
Very slightly.
it's all awaiting.
And that is only up to 48 hours. That's still putting down a lot of the models for a hurricane landfall in North Carolina.
Yeah, that can't be ruled out. It's honestly at this point I believe it's more likely as a scenario rather than a Florida landfall. We'll have to see.
The longer it stalls, do you think it is more likely to hit Florida or less? It's a question that we get here.
More.
Yeah.
I mean, the longer it stalls, the less likely that trough is going to pick it up. More likely that a steering current will entice it. The longer this thing stalls, the worse the scenario gets for the Bahamas, and probably the worse the scenario gets for Florida as well.
Yeah. Hopefully it doesn't stall for much longer, and hopefully this storm could make a more eastern track, but I think that's wishful thinking. We'll have to wait and see what the storm ends up actually doing at the end.
More questions. Does a hurricane have to keep moving in order to maintain intensity? Is the fact that Dorian has stalled causing it to weaken?
Well,
yes and yes.
Definitely.
Yeah. Storms, especially in this area, upwelling is definitely a problem for the system when it comes to stalling, and also there's some land interaction with the Bahamas as well. Beyond that, though, eventually storms end up losing enough ocean heat content to end up losing its intensity and start a gradual weakening process, or just a weakening trend all in general. But yeah, usually storms need to move to try and maintain that intensity.
You can see on this air mass imagery as well, the western side looking the frailest that it has done to date since its Category 5 peak. You can start to see those darker colours creeping in towards the end. We don't want to have false hope, but as people and as forecasters, we desperately want this storm to show signs of weakening. So we are very hopeful, but we don't know for sure whether that western destabilization is a sign that this storm is going to weaken quite a bit more, or not.
But for now, it's maintaining its intensity by the official intensity.
Also have to figure when this storm pulls northward and goes back into the Gulf Stream, there could be some re-intensification there as well.
Yeah, that's something that's concerning. It's also something that will have to be watched out for, especially when the storm ends up moving out.
But just watch them last frames again. There they go. The western side getting very bare on that imagery, and that is the strongest sign so far this storm could be weakening, but we still can't confirm whether that is the case or not. It could build back in just as easily. We've seen it so many times. But there it is right now. That's where we're up to. Storm's movement itself is very minimal, if not nil. It did that loop there, you could see, and then it stopped, and then it moved ever so slightly west-northwest, probably about half a mile an hour right now.
Yeah, it's just at this part.
I think that the loop here is continuing. It looks like that it's moving pretty much due west now and starting to turn to the south again.
Oh, Lord. More questions. Could it landfall in Myrtle Beach or any of South Carolina for that matter? I would say the chances are rather low, but hurricane force winds are a possibility there, even if the storm doesn't make landfall. And it is a common misconception that a landfall, if you're not at a landfall zone, that there's not going to be bad conditions, but hurricane conditions extend out. It certainly was 45 miles. I'm not sure if that's still the case, but it's something like that. This is quite a lot. So that is 90 miles in diameter. So 45 miles either side of the landfall zone, you'll get hurricane force winds. It'll probably be more than that by the time it gets to the Carolinas because of growth in size. And as for tropical storm force winds, those are expanding quite significantly. You could be very far away from the landfall zone and still get tropical storm force winds, and could be destructive, especially if you haven't prepared, thinking that the storm is not going to make landfall near you. But South Carolina, the whole coastal region there, should be watching very closely for hurricane conditions. Could the eye go through another eye wall replacement cycle is a question here, which is an interesting one to discuss.
It could, but there's no way we could say it right now. It's just trying to complete one, and beyond that, it could happen, but they're very hard to predict, and so it's just always going to be a wait and see. We'll have to always look at radar imagery, satellite imagery, and perhaps even recon to find if there's any other eye wall that might be trying to form in the future.
And we'll see if we can get some information from recon soon. Thomas, are you there? I don't know if he is here or not. Just that his imagery is on,
I'm here. I apologize.
On my screen here. I don't know if you want to do a brief assessment here.
Well, it looks like it just went away because it's refreshing because a new image just came in. But what was basically going on before that just happened was showing the western eye wall, the inner western eye wall basically gone, and the outer western eye wall becoming more robust. The rest of it, you still have the two eye walls, the rest of it, but definitely, especially now the southern side of the eye wall with the latest frames of radar, if it pops back up, we're also indicating, and there you go, weakness in the southern side of the eye wall as well. So that could also, that's probably going to be the next part of the inner eye wall to go away. And then we're just going to have the remaining half with the northern and eastern sides.
So would you say it's maintaining itself right now on radar?
I'd say it looks like it's maintaining itself. Yeah, I think that the outer eye wall in particular is looking nice. So yeah, it's maintaining its intensity right now.
And this new eye wall, if you were to have a guess, how wide is that in diameter?
It's actually a good question. Let me check.
Whilst we wait for that.
Okay, for some reason that's broken.
Whilst we wait for that estimate, how much rain is possible in the Bahamas? Can it be more than Harvey? We don't think so. Even despite all of this huge amounts of rain, I think a high estimate would be about 50 inches in some areas, and that isn't as much as Harvey. The National Hurricane Center say it's going to be up to 30 inches, so that's what they're saying. I don't know whether we can really guess or estimate very well how much rain will actually fall, because that is a lot more difficult to forecast than wind, for instance. How long is the stalling going to last? That's a good question. Your guess is as good as ours.
NHC says the stalling's probably going to last at least another 12 hours before the storm ends up pulling up and off to the north-northwest.
Yeah, and some models suggest it could be 24.
All right, I do have an estimation of the eyes. With if you go from the outer eye wall on one side to the inner eye wall on the other, basically where it's clear, it's about 30 miles.
All right. Thank you for that.
There is starting to become a very large, pronounced clearing on the western side of the infrared imagery. Hopefully this is, well, I don't know if this is part of the dreading or part of the hope. I'm not 100% sure. But this is at least a clear signature that the eye wall replacement cycle is also nearing completion. I'm still waiting for recon data.
When are we expecting that? Soon?
A few minutes, 2 to 3 tops.
Just a few minutes. Okay, great. And there is the imagery from Devon. I believe we're also joined by Strat at this time.
Yeah, good evening once again.
And we've been watching this storm. I can't remember even when you were last on with us, but stalling all day long. Strat, your thoughts?
I mean, from what I've seen, I've kind of been away from the screen for a couple hours. It's still almost the exact same spot that it was well over 5 hours ago, maybe moved a couple miles at most, from what I'm seeing. Am I not wrong? Because it feels like the southwestern part of the eye is almost at the exact same spot where it's barely clipping land.
Yeah, absolutely is. I'm just going to
It's
do
just
some...
an absolutely...
This storm is completely stationary, with the exception of the wobbles due to the eye wall replacement cycle. It's completely stationary.
Yeah, and it's just an absolutely horrifying thing to see as well. You know, people in the United States might be cheering this silently because it means the odds of impact are potentially less, but, you know, there's still numerous lives that are being forever impacted right now. You know, Nathan, you posted something in the Discord server. It looked like it was from Abaco Island of some of the damage, and there were no homes left. It was just really battered cars, and most of the island was still inundated significantly at that point in time as well.
This is damning. 9 hours. And this
they
storm
impact potentially low-lying areas. They changed geography for decades.
What were you saying, Nathan?
I didn't know Strat was still talking at that point. I just want to point out 9 hours, and the storm in that time is 2 miles northeast of where it was 9 hours ago.
Oh my god.
2.
Basically, worst case scenario.
I hit the alt button by mistake there. So Recon has done its pass through the northwestern eye wall and has found, well, let's see here. That will be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 distinct peaks of wind speed going into the northwestern eye wall.
You're
At
saying
least
it's got 6 eye walls?
distinct peaks.
Oh, there's a big echo somewhere.
I'm not saying it's got 6 eye walls. I'm saying that I found 6 distinct peaks winds going into the storm. So clearly, this storm structure is being significantly disrupted
Yes.
due to upwind.
That is interesting.
That's it. And it looks like minimum pressure is increased from flight level to the mid to upper 940s at this point in time as well. So we could be seeing at 11 p.m. a pressure closer to 950 millibars than 942, which for the United States is arguably more good news. But at the same time, the weaker the storm gets faster, the more likely it is to potentially be pulled westwards. You know, for Florida, it might not be as big of a problem as more as we are looking potentially for the Carolinas for potential landfall, really. And you know,
Nathan?
other than that, it's just notable that the storm, especially the southern and eastern sides, have increased in size pretty dramatically over the past 12 hours or so. Yesterday, at the same time, we were looking at Nassau hardly receiving much convection at all, and now the whole island is enveloped in it. The northern part in becoming quite significant convection as well.
David.
And if you look at the wind history as well, you'll see an expansion of the wind field starting to occur right around this point in time as well, even further. The NHC 5 p.m. Graphic for wind history showed it being barely onshore Florida, despite them saying it was just offshore. At this rate, with almost the exact same location and potential expansion, I wouldn't be surprised if we see potential tropical storm force winds onshore at this point in time.
Quite possibly. David, go ahead.
I've got on the screen the National Weather Service's Miami radar, and when we started live broadcast, there was nothing over Florida. And have a look at it. You've got the rain band, you've got 2 marine warnings, I think. One is a cube and then to its east. So I've got a feeling that it's actually drifted slightly west. Because I'm looking at where West Palm Beach, the tidal is on, and the eye was further east. So will I be right to say it's possibly slowly drifted west?
Well, sort of no, because as I said, in that 9-hour period, it's moved 2 miles northeast. It is essentially not moving at all. But yes, there are thunderstorms occurring along South Florida in particular now. I'm not sure if we've seen any severe thunderstorm warnings tonight yet, but there are a lot of marine warnings out there. I don't think there's anything going on in Florida at this point. There is a tornado warning, but it's way up in Minnesota, I think it is. Far towards the north, nothing to do with the storm. I'm just taking a look at Florida right now. I think it's just those special marine warnings over the Keys. I'm not seeing anything else at this time. So to reiterate the warnings that are in effect, they might change at the top of the hour. So bear that in mind. A storm surge warning is in effect for Lantana, Florida to Altamaha Sound, Georgia. A storm surge watch for north of Deerfield Beach to south of Lantana and Altamaha Sound to South Santee River. A hurricane warning for Grand Bahama and the Abacos Islands, Jupiter Inlet to Ponte Vedra Beach, Florida. A hurricane watch for north of Deerfield Beach to Jupiter Inlet and north of Ponte Vedra Beach to South Santee River. A tropical storm warning for north of Deerfield Beach to Jupiter Inlet and a tropical storm watch for north of Golden Beach to Deerfield Beach and Lake Okeechobee. Also from the National Hurricane Center, they are expecting 4 to 7 feet of surge from Lantana to South Santee River, 2 to 4 feet between Deerfield Beach and Lantana. Rainfall estimates additional 6 to 12 inches in northwestern Bahamas, isolated storm totals of 30 inches they're expecting. In the central Bahamas, an additional 1 to 3 inches, isolated 6. Coastal Carolinas 5 to 10 inches, isolated 15, and the Atlantic coast from the Florida Peninsula through Georgia 4 to 8 inches, isolated 10. They will have a new update in the next 25 minutes, and we will run that with you here live. At the minute, though, the storm, we're the only ones looking at the storm right now, without any backing from the NHC until the top of the hour. But we are getting those recon flights. And you just want to reaffirm what recon did find and what they are finding.
Yes, so recon has basically found, at least on the western penetration of the storm, that it has found the structure to be completely disintegrated. Actually, let me go ahead and pull up on the screen here really quick so I can really show what I'm talking about. Just bear with me.
Yeah, sure.
Is it fine if I chime in for a brief moment?
And the western side is clearly the weakest side on this imagery that we're looking at, although the inner eye wall, what appears to be, looks like it's come back in a little bit on those latest frames. So again, it's a wait and see on this, whether it recovers from that gap, or whether upwelling is really starting to take a toll on this storm. Someone was asking about what exactly is upwelling. And basically, when the storm stalls over one area for too long, then, well, it's a column of energy, and it is taking energy mainly from, well, exclusively really from the sea surface, and perhaps even underneath if it mixes through, and eventually at some point, if the storm stays in the same place for too long, it will run out of energy to sustain itself. And at this intensity, a storm needs a hell of a lot of energy to sustain itself, and maybe it is just running out of fuel. But that is a bit of speculation. Over to Devon's imagery.
Yep, I'm going to try to do this. Hopefully I'll be able to do this with my push to talk fully enabled here. So what you can see here is going through the center is that we have 1, 2, 3. We have 3 very distinct peaks that they ended up finding in the recon. But another thing that was very interesting that they ended up finding here is note that we have a 4th peak that's right there, and then a 5th and a 6th peak that's right there. And another thing is that typically when you see these wind profiles, what you typically end up seeing is that you typically end up seeing a curve, a smooth curve that's more like this before it ends up dropping down. And look at how it ends up spiking up here, then leveling off, and then jumping back up. So it's really, you can really see just how disrupted the structure of this storm is from a typical curve. Like I said, you would typically want to see kind of like an exponential line here as you would get towards the eye. And what you're clearly seeing here is that you're seeing it normally spikes up and down like this happen, but it's usually a way, way, way more smooth than this. If you look at recon from earlier missions, you'll actually see it is a pretty smooth curve. You can see that this jumps up, jumps down, jumps back up, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, maybe even 7 different peaks that you can see here from this curve. And that just shows you how disrupted the structure of the storm actually.
Well, I'd just like to say that I've been seeing some information, not sure if it's been confirmed or not, but the Abacus Island, there, I believe the officials are treating it as a mass casualty event.
Unfortunately,
that would not be surprising.
Yeah, and recon just passed through the southeastern eye wall and found 3 distinct peaks so far as well. It looks like there were 3 separate periods of Category 3 flight level winds. It looks like the minimum flight level pressure is down to, or up to 946.4 5-ish millibars, which is more weakening, which means that a drop zone will probably indicate a pressure closer to 950 millibars. Also notable compared to earlier, there's no Category 4 flight level winds on the southeastern quadrant at this point in time. So the storm is still weakening. I wouldn't be surprised if they go down to 130 at the next update based on that, just because the only quadrant you'd assume to have Cat 4 flight level winds will probably be the northeastern quadrant at this point in time. SFMR readings still are safely above 105 knots though. But not surprising to see if they would lower this to 115 knots at this point in time, just based off the information we're seeing so far. The system is getting, despite we presume somewhat marginal presentation on satellite, completely disheveled from all the upwelling that's occurring. Just to give perspective on how much energy a storm needs, a storm of this intensity any given second requires over 1 million times more energy than every nuclear bomb ever detonated in existence to this point in history. So it just shows how enormously powerful these things are. And the ocean, warm water is its fuel source. When a storm is this powerful, even when it's in an area of large ocean heat content where there's very warm water far beneath the surface, it just drains it so quickly. And then you get this upwelling situation that starts to kind of rip the storm apart at its seams almost. What we're seeing right now, to point out the 6 initial peaks in wind on the northwestern side and at least 3 on the southeastern side at this point in time.
And the southeastern side is the strongest by the looks of things.
The southeastern side is the strongest. So I'll go ahead and show you guys what it would typically look like normalized to the same exact curve that you would expect again once we get the full trip through the southeastern quadrant here. If we even have time for that.
I'm sure we will.
If the southeastern quadrant's the strongest at this point, then this is only a Category 3 storm now, if that's what we're going with. Unless the northeastern quadrant is somehow stronger, which could still be a possibility based on what we were seeing earlier, but the southeastern side did look the strongest, and this is only a Category 3 storm at this point in time. Which for the United States is tremendous news in terms of, at least for Florida, potentially. But the fact that the storm is over 50 miles an hour, potentially, not 50 miles an hour, over 30 miles an hour, potentially weaker than the NHC thought it'd be at this point in time yesterday. And compared to what they were even thinking, they were presuming it would be at least 15 miles an hour stronger than what it is right now.
Yesterday, they only had it. Yesterday, they forecasted for it to only lose Category 5 status now.
Yeah, so the fact that this change has happened so quickly could potentially mean that steering currents at the lower levels are more influential and potentially pushing it further westward. So although we presume and cheer this right now for Florida and hope that it means conditions will start to relieve on the Bahamas even sooner, at the same time it means that certain areas potentially are at more risk for potential landfall if the track starts to shift west again because of this. Those would primarily be the Carolinas at this point in time. And another interesting note is based on what the last recon mission had, the NOAA-2 when it was leave. Oh, there's another NOAA-2 actually en route right now. No, it actually looks like it was leaving earlier. Based on what it's showing, tropical storm force winds are on the Florida coast at this point in time. So that's something else to note, that tropical storm force winds are now inland on Florida.
We think, although I'm a little skeptical because the National Hurricane Center would usually post observations all the time from Florida. I don't think I've seen any just yet, unless I've not been looking hard enough.
It's weird because the reconnaissance flight level and SFMR levels flying over land at Florida at that point in time are indicative of tropical storm.
SFMR does not work over land.
Okay.
SFMR does not work over land.
Was it flight level winds as it starts crossing over land are in between 45 and 50 knots.
Still can't really.
And then you have to remember that wind over land has a significantly higher drag factor than wind over water, so it basically chops the flight level winds in half.
Hello.
So it's likely that, like I said, hurricane force gusts probably, but probably not sustained. I mean, tropical storm force gusts, yes, but probably not sustained wind.
And I think Isaac's there.
Hello?
Good evening.
You able to hear me good?
Just fine. What
Oh,
are your
okay.
thoughts on the storm right now and
Well,
looking to be rather disheveled on the western side?
well, I'll get to that in a minute. I just wanted to relay some information for anybody who may be concerned or wondering or curious. I wanted to say that Jim Eds of extremestorms.com, he is confirmed to be fine. He is trying to get out of the Bahamas and go back into the mainland United States so he could update his social media and stuff. And I wanted to also say that he apparently recorded a pressure down to 911 millibars in the storm. So that's an astonishing low pressure. There's also more good amount of ice cyclone is also reportedly fine. I can't confirm or deny that, but apparently he's fine. He's just a little bit shaken up from the storm, and I just wanted to relay that. My thoughts on the storm personally is that it's just like it seems to be just gradually weakening, like ever so slightly, every hour, just slightly weakening, maybe 5 miles an hour or so, give or take, to maybe have like a few millibar drop every hour by the looks of it. So it looks like it's gonna be a slow to weaken storm as long as it keeps kind of stalling where it's at right now. But that's just my thoughts and what information I have to pass up currently. So go ahead, guys.
Thomas, are you there right now?
Yeah, I am.
Just looking at this, at the imagery that you're showing us as well, how bad are those thunderstorms that are just about to reach Andros Island?
Those storms in particular, I'm unfamiliar with where Andros Island is
It's
actually.
the
Could you
biggest
please?
one.
That's the big one.
It's the big one. It's the big one.
Yep.
I can't really say much from reflectivity, especially with how far away the radar is. Obviously, it's probably going to be some heavy rain for them.
I just thought it was
Some
interesting
gusty
that
there.
they look quite red there, and I'm not sure on your color scales.
Yeah, I mean it's heavier rain. It's probably going to produce some gusty winds.
I'm sorry, I've got to interrupt. The update is out. 130 miles an hour it is at a pressure of 946 millibars from the National Hurricane Center, so they have put it down a little bit more to 130 miles an hour, pretty much as Strat suggested.
Yeah, I mean, the only reason they keep it at this right now is if they expect that the northeastern quadrant will have still some Category 4 winds. Otherwise, at the next pass, if northeastern or southwestern quadrant don't, this will probably go down to 125 miles an hour at midnight Eastern time.
Possibly
But
midnight?
the most notable thing is that this is still stationary at this point in time, not moving at all. Most forecasts had it at this point moving to the northwest at least somewhat, and that still just hasn't happened
I
at
just
all.
want to confirm as well that the warnings haven't changed at this full advisory, so there's nothing new with the warnings that are in effect, and really that is all. I don't think there's much change to the forecast. We'll see on their forecast cone once it gets released, because we've been awake for far too long to look at the raw numbers and figure it out for ourselves.
I mean, I still think one of the most important things is this thing is still stationary. On average, It's not moving at all. Every anticipation had that it would be moving to the northwest at this point in time, at least to some extent. And that, for some reason, for some great unfortune for parts of the Bahamas, has not happened at all. We're still seeing hurricane force winds onshore, Grand Bahama, significant tropical storm force winds still extending through Abaco Island and Grand Bahama at this point in time. According to the NHC graphics, potentially reaching Andros Island, although just based on the fact there's no warnings there, I doubt that. But you just see the convection in general and such a large system remaining exactly in place over areas that have potentially been obliterated. Preliminary damage reports show potentially total damage on Abaco Island. I don't know if you showed it on stream earlier, but it was in the live chat that all houses were completely leveled in certain areas, and the only thing left were feet and feet of seawater where land is supposed to be, and extremely battered cars. were the only
Yeah.
things that were left. And the fact that areas that were hit like that are still under tropical storm force winds
Yeah.
and heavy rainfall is astonishing and absolutely horrifying, to say the least.
Yeah, I saw images of cars that were flipped over and tossed around like they were toys. Like, I mean, this storm meant business when it made landfall. And I also saw some videos from Grand Bahama Island of the storm surge coming up to people's attics and second story, and over at the airport as well too. And it was just amazing.
Yep. The last
Just the
time we saw
ferocity of those.
the last time we saw landfall of that intensity was in 1935.
Yeah,
In the
and for the
Atlantic.
storm chasers there, we're glad to hear that they're okay. But to put in comparison, in 2017, everyone was baffled and astonished when Harvey's landfall pressure, the storm chasers were recording 938s and 939s. 9/11 is a completely different level to that regard, and that was reflected with being the strongest landfall of this century to this point in time in the Atlantic Ocean.
And the National Hurricane
that'd be-
Center had the peak pressure at 910, I believe, right?
And Recon did support that as well
Yeah.
with the minimum flight level pressures that they were getting yesterday at 907.5 millibars.
So do you think that
Which
could
is
be verified?
mind-boggling. The fact that there was 907.5 flight level just off water, and the fact that land interaction did actually raise its pressure a little bit with Abaco Island, it is possible that 910 is a verifiable official pressure. But if not, 911 is confirmed at minimum, to say the least.
At
So,
maximum.
At maximum, that's true. The minimum pressure is a maximum of 911 millibars. It could be
If that makes
910.
sense to you all. Yeah.
And intermediately, it was reaching 907.5 or potentially a bit lower on flight levels. So maybe they could lower it to 909, potentially post-analysis. But we're still looking at the strongest storm.
They're just numbers. The
We're still looking at, regardless of that, the strongest
toll
storm.
of the storm is quite telling.
We're still looking at the strongest storm to ever impact the Bahamas in the modern era, the strongest storm to ever exist in recorded numbers out in the Atlantic Basin outside of the Caribbean and Gulf of Mexico, beating Irma by a pretty sound margin, unfortunately. It's just incredible to see, really, and it's just very unfortunate.
Yeah, I'd be interested to see what Joss has recorded too, because he got into the storm as well, like Jim did. But apparently Jim got a low pressure of 911. I don't know if he got even lower than that or not. That's what I heard from Jim Cantori, and I'll be interested to see what Joss too.
And according to some of the live from David and Tim, storm surge warnings were extended northwards from the Altamaha Sound in Georgia to the Savannah River. Is the difference that's been made at this point in time.
I think that came in at the last minute there. Storm surge warning has been extended northward from Altamaha Sound to the Savannah River. Thank you for that.
Something that really hasn't been talked about at all, but Juliet has been upgraded to a Category 3 and is now expected to peak as a Category.
Yep, Juliet exhibited a pinhole eye earlier. We can take a look at that imagery now. There is Juliet, and that is becoming a rather powerful storm, rapidly intensifying at this point. And that is, well, obviously the wind speed at the bottom is wrong, and it's wrong on our screen as well, but it is now a major hurricane with winds of 115 miles per hour.
And it is also absolutely nowhere near land.
Yeah, and just the activity, the chops, that doesn't include the, depending on which source you're looking at, 2 or 3 active systems named by agencies in the Western Pacific right now. Actually, the JTWC now has all 3 named as active systems. Nor does it include the 3 invests in the Atlantic Ocean and another 2 invests in the Western Pacific as well. So an absolutely explosive time
Here's the brand
in the
new
tropics.
National Hurricane Center cone. They are not expecting a landfall by the looks of things, but as you can see, it is very close to one on the North Carolina Outer Banks. Well, the National Hurricane Center cone continues to shift ever so slightly further east, especially the first part of it. So the center of the storm could pass anywhere within the cone, but those percentage chances of a Florida landfall are slowly starting to approach a very low number. The latest forecast cone, I can actually tell you that Florida is completely out of the forecast cone now. At the latest advisory, the cone begins to intersect the coast near just east of Beaufort, South Carolina. Georgia. Is it Georgia or South Carolina there? I was right the first time. South Carolina. East of Savannah, Georgia as well. Couldn't quite see where that state line was. I shouldn't have questioned myself. But still, you could be looking at hurricane conditions along the Florida coast, anywhere from the hurricane warning zone all the way up to the Outer Banks of North Carolina.
The western eye wall on infrared is completely disintegrating.
Here it is again, western side, we're looking at it. Not so sure, Devon. It's coming back at the minute.
Unless it's coming back at the minute. Well, I'm looking at 6-minute imagery. I'm not looking at the 1 minute.
I'm looking at 6-minute imagery as well.
I don't know why I've chosen.
Oh,
you're looking at 6-minute imagery as well. Fantastic. Well, from what I have here, at least in the last frames, complete breakdown in the western eye wall. Might start coming back here again due to the eye wall replacement cycle, but that's likely what's going on.
Well, there we are. We'll be updating all the graphics on our screen shortly as we reach 11 p.m. Eastern Time, but if you're familiar with our schedule, then we pretty much sign off for the night. At least our voices do at this point. The live view of the storm, this updates all the time on our screen. It is always up to date, so you can check back at any time to take a look at it when we're not broadcasting our voices forward with our analysis. Usual schedule, I think. Our next update will be a video update that comes out from Tim in just over an hour, or possibly less than that. Depends how easy it is to make that update for him. And then our update, our next update will be at 9 a.m. Tuesday morning. And then we play it by ear as to how much we broadcast during the day as well as we continue to watch this storm. So it's been another incredibly long day. It's been a tragic day for those in the Bahamas. And people who have any interests in the Bahamas. It's been terrible times, and the storm is still not moving. It's still carrying Category 4 force winds, and that storm surge, huge amounts of rain. But there we are. Well, thanks for tuning in. We do our very best to keep you up to date with the latest and the best information that is possible to give to you, but we do have to take breaks every so often, otherwise I don't think we'd be able to cope. That's all for now. We will leave you with this imagery, and we'll see you again tomorrow morning. Stay tuned for more on the Force 13 channel and across social media, Facebook and Twitter. Search Force 13 all in text. As for now, that's us signing off for the night, and we'll see you first thing tomorrow.